Hello and welcome to Iford. I'm Marianne Cartwright-Hignett and I have the wonderful pleasure of living here. We're extremely sad this year not to be able to welcome our visitors as usual. Visitors have been coming to Iford since 1910 when Harold Peto lived here, although the history of the house goes back way beyond to Tudor times. But in the absence of being able to come here in person, I hope we can just take a little bit of Iford to you, and I'd love to take you around and show you what's behind the gate. So follow me. And here we are, coming through the entrance of the gate into the garden, paradise as Harold Peto called it when he lived here. Harold lived here from 1899 until 1933 when he died, and he was a very famous Edwardian architect and landscape designer. It was he who put in place this beautiful loggia, framed around this Venetian palace window that was from the 14th century, and he put in place this wonderful gateway to welcome you as you enter into his garden. Sound of water comes from this pond, mounted either side by these wonderful deers that are copies of those found on Herculaneum. And as we turn around, we get a glimpse up the stairs of what's yet to come in the garden. And the loggia, adorned with wisteria, which is rumoured to be one of the oldest in the UK. We don't know exactly when it was planted, but wisteria came to the UK first in 1815 and was here a long time before Harold was. And you can find here the porthole in the wall. I come over here where you can see Harold, when he built the wall, made these special spaces just for the wisteria to peep on through. Now these steps were already here when Harold himself moved to Iford on these terraces, but Harold, being an architect, was never happy unless he embellished and adorned and made it really beautiful. You can see here in the loggia he added the rondels when he built the loggia and various Byzantine rondels into it just to add a little bit more character and to cast your mind back to another time. You're not sure which century you're in when you're here at Iford. And as he rebuilt the steps, he aggrandised them with these magnificent columns and urns on top of them. Things that he'd collected on his travels as he went around the world. He actually circumnavigated the world in 1898, just before coming to Iford. And he went all around to places as far as Japan, as well as Canada, Africa, and of course Europe. In all of those places, he was getting a real feel for different architecture, use of space, but also plants. He was a real plantsman, and it's something that's often overlooked with Harold. He did train as an architect, but it was when he was working on the home of William Robinson that he had the pleasure of meeting the great man and was introduced by him to gardening. And that was where Harold discovered he had an absolute love for the garden and an absolute love for plants. And he went on, after he left his partnership with Sir Ernest George, to focus not just on architecture, but also on the plants, to learn more about them. And he saw the garden as an extension of the house itself, an extra room, if you like. Lutyens was one of his pupils, and we know that Lutyens came here to visit Harold at Iford after he moved here, so they obviously stayed firm friends afterwards. Now, obviously Lutyens had Giulia by his side. Harold was both for himself, but we know that he was well respected by Robinson and Giulia. In fact, Giulia wrote about Harold in her books and praised his work very highly. She once managed to accuse him of overplanting, which, coming from Giulia, is a rather unexpected and unusual turn of phrase. I'd love to have seen what he'd done. It was for a garden in France. Harold has specialised in the Cap Ferrat. Now, the gardens that you see today are very much laid out by Harold Peto, but their history goes far before that and also beyond. So, looking up here you can see the Great Terrace with its colonnades and this magnificent plane tree. This tree was planted in January 1779, and in January 1779 Thomas Gaisford was born, and he was the son of John Gaisford, who had bought Iford and moved here. Now, they were very big garden lovers, and in fact we think that they're the ones that are responsible for the wisteria in the front of the house. As well as that magnificent plane tree, they also did all the terracing, and they built the Great Terrace originally. At that time it was a grass terrace and a lawn terrace, and it would have been one of the earliest lawn terraces, because someone said that to me once and I was very confused about the concept of lawn being new, but of course, although grass has been around for a long time, lawnmowers were not. And so when they built it in the 1700s, it would have been a fairly early lawn terrace, and it was described in the press at the time as being one of the most magnificent lawn terraces in England, with a magnificent view beyond. And I think very little has changed, although obviously Harold Peto has hugely adorned it. Now these back terraces are all Georgian, and these days we've planted them up with rosemary and lavender, and we've got some more planting going on, as you can see at the end. And this is our rose lawn. Now during World War II, so this has previously been Harold Peto's rose garden, and during World War II it was dug up for victory to grow cabbages, which is slightly curious because the soil is actually totally wrong for cabbages, but I think people did what they needed in those times for obvious reasons. We went through a large project here at Iford to restore it. So the roses were replanted a few years ago with the help of Robert Mattock. We managed to source a fair few. We don't know exactly which roses were planted where. We don't have planting plans from Harold. I doubt he ever did it. In his own personal space, you plant what you want when you want, as you do at your own home. And but we use the planting labels. We have over nearly 300 of them. And so we know which roses he had in the garden, and there was a big sourcing exercise to find them from around the world, and we did just that and have replanted them with varying degrees of success. Here we have the Japanese wisteria brought back to Iford by Harold, which is just lovely. And many of you will know William and myself were very fortunate to bring on have Troy Scott-Smith join us as our head gardener last year from Sissinghurst, where he was previously head gardener, and before that he was head gardener at Bodnant Gardens, that I think many of you will be very familiar with and love. And he's introduced tulips to the garden, and as you can see, they look absolutely magnificent. And then here we have these back steps going up, leading up to the Great Terrace. Now a lot of this was had to be rebuilt by my in-laws, Elizabeth and John, because when my mother-in-law bought Iford in 1965, the garden was sadly thought lost, because following World War II, not only was there no money, but there was also no labour, and therefore gardens suffered an awful lot. If I just turn around, you can get a bit of a feel. It feels very Mediterranean here today. I feel like I think I'm in Italy, and you can hear the bird song all around. And there's always lots of restoration going on here at Iford, continually, even to this day. As many of you will know, our cloister suffered major subsidence, but we're delighted to say that the work is just about finished on that. Here we're restoring the Blue Pond area. I won't spend too long on that. We'll show you the finished product as and when we're able to start building on it again and start work. But here we go, as we carry on walking through, we get up to the magnificent area that is the entrance to the Great Terrace. Now this is also where The Secret Garden was filmed. I'm not sure if it's release date anymore, but you'll probably recognise this wonderful, it's actually a Byzantine capital, but Harold used it as a well piece instead, with a column and the lion on it. And all around me, looking out onto the blossom and the orchards beyond, where we have where Iford cider was born, and we now use apples from many other orchards nearby as well. And here we have the Great Terrace. This is one of my absolute favourite wisteria up here in the Casita. It's like an umbrella. As you can see, my chair is out there from last night. I should have put it away really, but there's nowhere better to sit and relax after a day of gardening and just take in the view all around. Looking out. If I carry on going around here, you can see we have our tree Peony is out in full, and one of my favourite roses in the whole garden, hiding in the shade here still, Toile d'Hollande. Here it is. I always just think the red is about as red a rose as you can get, and it looks gorgeous against the casita. Now within the casita itself, this is just a magnificent building. There used to be a garden shed here, and Harold decided that he would, in his way, make it pretty and build this beautiful, beautiful building. Even the ceiling, you mustn't forget to look up, has its merits. And when adorned with the wisteria, the two together are just a beautiful combination. Now this area here had to be remodelled by my father-in-law, so this box planting and parterres were put in by him, and the various the pots that you see are Chigi family pots. So my mother-in-law is part of the Chigi family from Tuscany in Siena, or Siena in Tuscany as I should say, and it's a very old family. Indeed, there's a Chigi pope back in the day in the 1600s, and they have some magnificent palazzos out there, and we were fortunate enough to inherit these pots, which have Bacchus overlooking them. I do love him, he's great fun. And it just adds to the formality of this, the most formal area. And there you have Romulus and Remus with the she-wolf looking out, guarding Iford and keeping us all safe. It's a copy taken from the one in the Capitoline. Harold Peto managed to sweet-talk the curator into allowing him to do so during the sack of Italy, really, to make sure that there was a copy in case the Capitoline itself did get ransacked. And Iford was seen as a safe place, and Harold a safe pair of hands. Now up here, we're being led into a completely different area of the garden. As we step up into the Japanese garden. Now this area is basically my father-in-law's part of the garden. He designed this pond, so when Harold was here he didn't get very far. He didn't find a water source. That big rock over there, now that's Mount Fuji. It was uncovered when he was trying to bring a sarcophagus back. Harold was off on his travels, and the chaps were told that they must have a very flat sort of surface to bring this important piece back into the garden. And they found a bit of a rock, and they started digging and digging and digging, and they found this humongous rock in the end and unearthed it. And when Harold returned from his travels and saw it, he said, "Ah, it's my Mount Fuji." And it saw it as a sign that this must become a Japanese garden. But although he'd been to Japan, he had a Japanese garden elsewhere in the garden, but it wasn't very large. He did manage to build this teapot, and this is the lantern that he brought back from Japan, which we've incorporated into the garden. I'll just stand here. You can see the trickle of the waterfall and the song of the birds and the blossom over everything. And the pagoda over there. There's a lot of symbolism within the Japanese garden, but I'll save that for another time. But the north, south, east and west, the cardinal points all mean something slightly different, and my father-in-law has designed it incredibly carefully, placing each stone specifically to where he thought it should go. Now I'm just walking on through, and we're going to be coming back to the Great Terrace again shortly, but just going through the woodland with birds all around. And as we look up this way, you'll see at the top a column, and that's a column that Harold erected to Edward VII, the peacekeeper, for his efforts during World War I to try and keep the peace. And looking out, here you see absolutely magnificent view of the valley. And our wisteria, it's just out so early this year with this glorious weather, and it's ever so strange not having people around to enjoy it. And I know this isn't quite the same, but I do hope that this helps transport you here to Iford and walk around and listen to the birdsong and taking in the delights of the birds, the bees, the wisteria and the other plants. Now here we are on the Great Terrace, under the cherry tree that's finished blossoming. Now that urn may look relatively small compared to the tree, but these urns are actually huge. If you see them in person and stand next to them, I'm just going to turn around the video now. See, well, I can't. They reminded Harold Peto of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, which is why he brought them to Iford, because he just loved them and couldn't resist buying them. And here we have our wonderful dogs. I think this dog is everyone's favourite, having a good old scratch on the terrace. And there's a beautiful sarcophagus over there that's actually Grade 2 listed, and it depicts a wild boar hunt from ancient Greece. It's absolutely beautiful. Thank you ever so much for joining us today here at Iford Manor. If you'd like to learn more about the garden and hopefully visit it in future once we're open, then please do follow us and visit our website. Thank you ever so much for watching.